Hi, Dr. Mills. I'm really grateful that you're here today sharing your wisdom with us. You're an author, you're a researcher, you're a podcaster, you have practice. I don't know if there's anything that you don't do. Before we get into your teachings, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how did you arrive at the decision of becoming the doctor that you are today?
Thank you, Nancy, and I'm so excited to be here with you and your listeners and viewers today. Hi, everybody. So I trained in Canada as a medical specialist, a specialist in physical medicine and rehabilitation. And I was doing research as well as part of my practice. I was working in a big rehabilitation hospital in Vancouver, BC. My career there was booming. I was being invited to present all over the world, my research findings. And in the middle of all that, I started noticing that things weren't super great with my health, but I did what most women do is I ignored it. I thought to myself, maybe this is just normal, right? Like this is regular transitioning of like how my periods are changing and how I'm feeling and my moods and my sleep. And I was too busy to really pay attention to it. And I didn't have the understanding or training to understand that because we're actually not taught much about things like hormone health and gut health, in our medical specialty training from the perspective of like whole body health. And it really took the illness of my dad. So he got diagnosed with ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a fatal disease with no cure. And he was a seemingly healthy man. He was, exercising and he was eating the way he had been told was a really good, healthy way to eat. And we had no family history and he got this condition. And it was enough to shock me out of my daily routine and for me to start asking the question, why is this man developing this condition? And then I started looking with the same eyes to my patients. Why are my patients presenting with these bizarre chronic diseases? Why am I experiencing these problems with my health? And when I started asking the question why, it really drove me to dive into the research in a different way. So looking at research from a whole body health perspective, the root causes, I came across the training of functional medicine, which is also known as root cause medicine, which is basically a group of health professionals who also have either personally had health issues that have shocked them out of the regular routine or loved ones. And when you start learning about root cause medicine, that's when it just starts opening up this huge realm of research. So it's all published in the research, things like gut health and leaky gut and gut microbiome dysfunction, hormone imbalances, toxins, all those things. And when I started looking at the research, my mind likes to categorize things so I can make sense of it. And as I was looking at the research, I came to the conclusion that generally speaking, you can put root causes of any kind of condition into one of four pillars, and usually they're interconnected. So it's not just in one pillar, but you can categorize them that way. And the four pillars of whole body health, as I like to call them, are hormone balance, gut health, stress response, and toxins tolerance. So now I approach health in that way, whether we're talking about health promotion, which I do in my women's health promotion programs, or when we're talking about treatment, which I provide for patients who are residents of British Columbia, Canada. I do a group medical program that essentially delivers an anti-inflammation protocol to reduce inflammation, which is either causing, contributing, or perpetuating every single chronic disease. You're going to find some degree of inflammation. And we know that if we can reduce inflammation using these four pillars, we can actually experience improvement in that chronic condition. Interestingly, menopause is not a disease, it's a life stage, but inflammation is something that really plays up in menopause in terms of turning up the dial and the severity and frequency of the symptoms we have with it. Everything from flashes, night sweats, weight issues, mood issues, brain function, all those things. And then the chronic diseases that are often associated with menopause, like the heart issues, cholesterol being high, osteoporosis coming on board, dementia starting to show up, right? An increased risk of Alzheimer's and stroke. All of those things have inflammation as one of the root causes. And again, if we can turn down the dial, using these strategies, and most of them are actually natural strategies. There are options such as medications like hormone replacement therapy, but that's really not the foundational work, right? There needs to be the foundational work to reduce inflammation, because no matter what strategy you use, if you have inflammation on board that's contributing to your condition, whether, whatever chronic disease that it is, adding something like a medication on top of that can actually make things worse. So you really do have to look at that foundational, health, that whole body health, using primarily lifestyle, nutrition, for some people supplements, a specific kind of exercise, stress reductions, toxins, natural detoxification support, and that kind of approach.
Wow, that's great. I'm really happy that you have this program, doctor, because, I know that once you reach that threshold of menopause, there's a lot of talk about doing research into HRT, and it's very important. However, not every woman is going to be a candidate. And I feel like it's really important to have a program out there that can alleviate a lot of the symptoms. And it certainly sounds like your program does that for many women. I've read the reviews.
Oh, thanks. I think you're referring to Body Wisdom, my
Oh,
health
yes.
promotion program.
Yes.
I have two health promotion programs. One runs usually in the fall, like September to November, December, and then Body Wisdom, which is starting up end of January, and that runs for 4 months. And yeah, I designed the programs, and in particular Body Wisdom, which is coming up soon, that you're mentioning, on the foundation of those 4 pillars, and using the root cause approach, as you say, to up-level one's health. Because even if you are a candidate for hormone replacement therapy, again, you don't want to add estrogen into an inflammatory body. An inflamed body, just doesn't handle estrogen very well. It will convert estrogen into not so desirable products. So whether you're a candidate for HRT or not, you do need to pay attention to reducing your inflammation levels in your body.
Great. So can we dive into the 4 pillars a little
Yeah,
bit?
absolutely. So again, they're interrelated, right? So I'll be talking about one and then talking about the other and linking them back. So I like to start with hormone balance, because there's many ways you can disrupt hormone balance. A couple of the portals into disrupting hormone balance are very common in today's society, unfortunately. So for example, when we change the levels of glucose in our blood, so that's a type of sugar, a very simple sugar, and many of the foods that we eat, typically the carbohydrates, when they're broken down into our body, they release glucose. Glucose gets absorbed into the blood. And it's not that we don't want glucose in our blood. We do need some glucose for normal bodily functions, but there's a Goldilocks zone. So you don't want it to be too high or too low, right? If you get too much glucose in the body, that triggers hormone insulin to be produced in too high amounts. And now hormones are messengers. So it's very interesting, because you need to understand what the hormones do to understand the impact that they have if you over or under produce them. And if you overproduce insulin, there's some short-term consequences and some long-term consequences. So the short-term consequences of insulin being overly produced is that the message that your body is going to get is to store fat, because there's a lot of glucose around to be burned as energy. That's the message that the body gets. So it's going to turn off your fat burning capacity, and so that you can then use the glucose that triggered the overproduction of the insulin. So too high glucose, in the blood causes too high insulin, which causes a fat storing response. The other thing that happens in the short term with too high insulin is that the immediate job of insulin also is to tell the body to suck up the glucose, to take the glucose into the tissues, so the tissues can use the glucose for energy production. And if you have too high glucose, that causes too high insulin. There's a ton of glucose that then rushes from the blood into the tissues. And so your glucose levels will drop very quickly and too low. Oftentimes you'll either not feel that, the blood glucose getting too low, but many people will feel that as a drop in energy, hungry, hanger, when you're kind of angry and hungry, kind of irritable. And it's a stressful thing for your body. So you go into the stress response, which, is that 3rd pillar. And the stress response, what happens with that is your body makes cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And cortisol is an inflammatory hormone if it's overproduced. So right there, you're triggering some inflammation in the lows, right? So you may not feel the highs and the lows, but those are the hormonal messages and imbalances that are happening in the background. How does one get into trouble with too much glucose? Well, you have to understand that there's three different kinds of carbohydrates. So not all carbohydrates are created equal. The first kind is the simple carbohydrates. Those are things like table sugar, which is broken down into glucose, sucrose, fructose, and lactose from milk. All of these are the most simple sugars. And so a table sugar or a highly refined sugar, whether it's from corn, beets, maple, or coconut, those sugars are in their most simple form. So it's a quick absorption. The body doesn't even really have to break it down. It can just absorb it right in. And when you get is a quick, big spike in the glucose levels in your blood. So those are the most problematic, are the simple sugars. The second type of carbohydrate are your starchy carbohydrates. So starch is when you take glucose and you link them into big chains. So they're big chains of glucose. Now, starch in the whole foods world is typically found in plants and vegetables. So you're going to find them in your high starch vegetables like potatoes and corn and beets, a little bit less, but still in carrots, right? And you're going to find them in whole grains like rice and oats and teff and, wheat and those sorts of things, quinoa and beans. So all of those are very healthy foods. The starch is bound up in the fiber, but it still has a lot of starch. So you have to learn how to eat your starchy carbohydrates in a way that doesn't massively spike your blood glucose. Because if you get yourself a big plate of beans and rice, and you measure your blood glucose response to that, you're going to see a huge rise in your blood glucose. Same thing with a bowl of oats. While oats are a very healthful food, if you don't eat them in the right way, which I'll discuss, you're going to run into problems with your blood glucose too. And the way that you do that is you use a few strategies. The first involves the third type of carbohydrate, which is fiber. So fiber is a kind of carbohydrate that has no glucose in it. It's just pectin, cellulose, hemicellulose, and those are the cell walls of plants. And so you'll find a lot of fiber in your high fiber, low starch vegetables like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, all of your lettuces, radicchios, right? All of those leafy greens, your herbs, all of those are very high fiber, low starch vegetables. Basically every vegetable except for your high starch ones that were discussed. And you're going to find some fiber in your oats and your beans and your whole grains, but there's a lot more starch to them. So they're less of fiber and more of starch. And when you eat fiber first, when you eat high fiber foods first, your high fiber vegetables first, that fiber gets broken down in your stomach into a substance that's kind of like a gel, like a mucus, like a gel kind of substance. And that gel fiber substance coats your small intestine, which is right after your stomach, so that the starch and the simple sugars from your high starchy vegetables or your fruits that have simple sugars in them will then be, absorbed. The absorption is slowed down because of this protective gel layer of the fiber. So the fiber buffers the entry of glucose from the starch and the simple sugars from the intestine into the blood. So that improves your blood glucose levels to that meal. So if I eat, a serving or two servings of vegetables, high fiber vegetables, before I eat my rice, my bread, my pasta, my oats, my quinoa, my beans, whatever potatoes, if I eat them first, I will have a much better blood sugar response, blood glucose response, than if I don't eat them at all, right? Or even if I eat them after. So the sequence matters. That's been studied in research as well. And why is that important? Because you are improving your insulin hormone balance, which allows your body to burn fat for fuel when it needs it, right? To access the fat that you want to burn off and lose weight if that's what you want. And it also allows the insulin hormone to be produced at a level that's not too high, so you don't trigger that low glucose response that comes after the overproduction of insulin. So people say, well, I'm having too low blood sugars. I should be probably eating more sugar. It's actually the opposite, which is super counterintuitive, right? Because some people get into a low blood sugar state, low glucose state. They get hangry, hypoglycemic, irritable. So they reach for another food to feel better. But what happens is that when they reach for a type 1 or 2 carb, right, those starchy or simple sugar type carbs without the buffer of fiber in there, they're going to run into glucose problems. The other three strategies for improving your blood sugar control, your blood glucose control is, so that we talked about fiber. The second one is healthy fats. The third is protein. And the fourth is vinegar. So those four strategies, fiber, fats, protein, and vinegar, have been studied in research in humans without diabetes, by the way. So with or without diabetes, this is important even if you don't have prediabetes or diabetes. And eating foods in this way will improve your blood glucose levels, which means better hormone balance. So when I look at a meal, I want to see on my plate, half of the plate is vegetables, the high fiber vegetables, mostly cooked, because as we age, our digestive power decreases. And so we're not as able to eat raw broccoli or raw cauliflower like we used to as a child. So we usually have to pre-digest our food with some cooking. So steaming, sauteing, baking, roasting. So you're going to use those strategies. And so half of your plate is vegetables, the high fiber vegetables. 1/4 of your plate is your starchy carbs. So that might be a combination of rice and beans. That could be your oats, that could be your bread, your pasta, your rice. And the other quarter would be a source of protein, high quality protein. So if you're omnivore, that could be a variety of different meats and fish, poultry. If you're a vegetarian or vegan, you're looking at your organic soy products. I say organic because it's a very heavily sprayed crop. And so that allows you to, really hone in on the pillar of hormone balance. There's much more to this, but I wanted to give you a sample of how research has really proven that there are common ways that we are imbalancing our hormone health through daily things that we do. And one of them is diet, the other one is sleep, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to share one with you. Any questions about that before I move on to the second pillar, which is gut health?
No, I'm really happy that you're discussing the monitor of blood sugar. I think that's great because, I think that the more aware we are of what's going into our body and what the reactions are with our blood sugar. And, I think that's really wonderful. I'm really surprised though, just a side note, that avocados are really high in fiber. Do you know why?
So avocados are a fruit, technically. So avocados and tomatoes and olives, they're fruits by definition. And there's a lot within each kind of type of food. There's a huge variety. Just like within vegetables, there's high fiber, low starch, all the way through to high starch and low fiber. Same thing with fruits. There's high fat fruits like olives, right, are very high fat fruit, as is coconut and avocado. So we get really clean fats from that because they're so high in fat. It's very easy to, you just basically have to squeeze it and the fat comes out, right? As opposed to vegetable seed oils where you have to very chemically process to get the fat out, because seeds, right, you have to get a lot of them to make a little bit of fat. Mm-hmm. And same thing, like that some fruits are high in fiber and other high fiber fruits are berries. So blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, they're also high fiber fruits relative to simple sugars. Whereas some fruits like mangoes, bananas, pineapples, they're very high in simple sugars and starches. So they are your more high, so I tell people don't make a smoothie with banana, mango, pineapple. Yeah, if you're going to make a smoothie, use berries. Those are the ones that won't, upset your blood glucose balance. I've seen it. And the interesting thing about monitoring your blood sugar, as you mentioned, is that in Body Wisdom, my health promotion program, one of the steps, we do 4 steps in 4 months. And one of the steps is to monitor blood glucose using a continuous glucose monitor, for example. And that's really important from a health promotion perspective. So even if you don't have prediabetes or diabetes, particularly if you do, but even if you don't, because you can see real time the things that you're doing unknowingly. And it's amazing to me how some people will, react to a banana, like a massive blood glucose response, or to a bowl of oats. And here they are eating this, having their smoothie or having their bowl of oats in the morning, adding their things to it, but not realizing that they're giving themselves a big hormone imbalance every day. And the reason it's important to do that for oneself at least once in your life, there are certain time points I think people should monitor their blood glucose. at least once pre-menopause, once perimenopause, and once when you're in menopause already established, you've been there for a while, because the way our hormones change affect our blood glucose response to foods. Another reason to do blood glucose monitoring is because the second pillar, which is gut health, affects your response to foods. And this was shown very intelligently in a study where they took twins who had the exact same DNA, but they had differences in their gut microbiome. So the microbiome in your gut is that collection of organisms made up of bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites. We're meant to have them there, but a good community will support your health and a bad community will sabotage it because they're inside of you. So they have very direct connections with your tissues. So clearly you want a good, healthy gut microbiome. And they also help you digest your food. That's one of the jobs that they do. A good, healthy gut microbiome will properly break down your fiber. We cannot use fiber for digestion, but they can. They'll break down the fiber and turn it into B vitamins, K2 vitamin, ketones, which are very healthy for the body. So when you have a healthy gut microbiome, you have really good usage of your fiber. But when you don't, it changes the way it uses fiber and glucose. So they did the study on twins and they found that they gave the twins the same amount carbohydrate containing meals. And one of the twins had a big blood glucose response and the other one didn't. And the difference had to do with their gut microbiome. And so there are things that we do on a daily basis unknowingly harming our gut health. And one of the big contributors to this, by the way, is the fact that when food scientists started creating ultra-processed foods and wanting to make them last on the shelf, so whether it's a liquid product like a milk alternative like oat milk or nut milk or soy milk or rice milk, in order to keep that milk from separating and staying all homogenized, like uniform through the milk, they would add something like an emulsifier, right? Which is a chemical used to maintain that liquid product, as an example. And now in those days, they didn't require research to be done on humans using those products because they found that these food additives, as they're called, emulsifiers is one kind of food additive, would stay in the gut, would not be absorbed into the body. So they assumed that because we weren't absorbing it into our body, it was staying in our gut, it wouldn't cause a health problem. But fast forward a few decades into the now, we know that these food additives, because they stay in the gut, they're affecting the gut microbiome. They are usually harming the gut microbiome. There's been some studies even showing that it starts to cause gut inflammation as a result of these changes in the gut microbiome. And once you have inflammation in the gut, it's going to eventually spread to the rest of the body because your immune system, 70% of your immune system is in your gut. And so when you cause inflammation in the gut, that activates your immune system. Now your immune system is on alert, and your immune system is what triggers inflammation in the body. So your immune system will go from the gut and travel through the body and spread inflammation. So inflammation in the gut shows up as inflammation in the skin. It could be adult acne, eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, rashes like perioral or periocular dermatitis. It can show up as problems with the hair, like hair loss. It can show up as malnutrition affecting nail health. It can show up in the joints as joint pain, lower back pain, arthritic conditions, in the tissues like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. And gut microbiome imbalances have been linked to every brain condition you could think of. So from autism to ADHD to multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, what my dad got, right? So it's actually quite profound. And, when they say, it's a very common saying to say, from the old days of Hippocrates, for example, they would say all disease begins in the gut. Well, we don't know that for sure, but it sure is looking like it. And at the very least, if you have any chronic condition, no matter what it is, high cholesterol, hypertension, all diabetes, you have to address gut health as part of your treatment protocol. And if you want to stay healthy and be healthy, you have to support your gut health. And one of the foundational things is to, first of all, eliminate excess sugar, eliminate ultra-processed foods from the diet. And for some people, it means doing an elimination diet to identify, are there certain foods that over time have started causing problems with your gut health for a number of reasons? And if we eliminate those foods, do you feel better? If we reintroduce those foods, how does that make you feel so that you can get a very clear idea? Oh, look at that. My body used to tolerate lactose or dairy and now it can't, or it was okay with gluten and now it's not, so on and so forth. So that's step 2 of body wisdom, is to do a group elimination diet and being provided all of the resources and recipes and lists and tracking, because it's all about tracking, right? We quickly forget how we were and how we are so that we can compare those two and make very, educated decisions about what we should or should not continue to eat moving forward to achieve our best health. And whenever we go through this, it's always amazing to me the things that do improve, like energy levels start to skyrocket, bowel movements get better, the skin, like the sleep. I've had lower back pain issues resolved. Like it's really quite profound, So that's the second pillar, which is gut health, which is gut microbiome, digestive power, all of those things. So again, a small taste of what you need to understand, but it's a really great introduction into that second pillar. Any questions about that before we move to the third pillar?
It's great overview, doctor. So I know that the bacteria Firmicutes is primarily the bacteria that's responsible for obesity, and obviously it loves sugar. In order to rebalance that bacteria in the gut, how do you feel about taking a probiotic to do that? I mean, I know that some people say, well, it's kind of like a crapshoot because we don't know if the bacteria is alive when you ingest it, and then it has to survive the stomach acid. So what is your opinion on that?
There's a couple of things to understand with that question. So first of all, you have to understand that there's a reason why that bacteria overgrew in the first place. And if all you do is add a probiotic, you may experience some temporary improvement, but once you stop the probiotic, the problem will come back. So what caused that overgrowth and imbalance in the first place? Again, is it excess sugar? Is it ultra-processed food? Is it artificial sweeteners, which can have that effect? Is it stress, right? So there's other things. Was it a previous course of antibiotics? So, a problem that came and went, right? But with lasting effects. Is it the use of proton pump inhibitors, which decrease stomach acid, which then affects your gut microbiome balance through that route? So essentially you have to first, I think, is get at the root cause. And as long as you're addressing the potential root causes, then you can add a probiotic and you may expect to experience some success with that. Now, there are 3 different kinds of probiotics, right? 3 different categories of probiotics. One is a friendly yeast probiotic called Saccharomyces boulardii, which has been shown to help balance the gut microbiome, including bacteria. So it can have an indirect balancing effect on overgrowth of other bacteria. And that one does survive the digestive system effects. They've studied it in neonatal ICU babies, so teeny tiny vulnerable babies. The second category is the kind of, bacteria that you would find in fermented foods. So like sauerkraut and, kefirs, that kind of thing. And those are the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. Now, those don't necessarily survive the stomach acid, but research shows that they still have a beneficial effect on the gut microbiome, whether it's through, the pieces that are left over causing signaling to happen in the gut microbiome. We're not really sure why, but it does appear to have a beneficial effect. And the third category is the spore-based bacteria. So they're the kind that are found in the soil. And in the soil, they're protected by a spore. So those ones do survive the gut stomach acid and go into the gut and have a beneficial kind of balancing effect on the gut microbiome. But again, the thing with probiotics is if you just take a probiotic without identifying and recognizing, and the thing is, to be honest, you're never going to know exactly what it is that caused it. So you have to address all of the root causes, which is why it requires a comprehensive program or protocol. So doing just one thing may get you so far, right? And if you're lucky enough that that one thing was the primary contributor, you're going to get all the results that you want. But if it's one of the contributors, you'll get a certain amount of improvement. So for example, if you cut out all ultra processed foods except for artificial sweeteners, you'll get a certain improvement for sure. But if you continue the artificial sweeteners, you're not going to get the massive amount of improvement that you would like, the full improvement that you are capable of experiencing. So just as an example, right? So that, I hope that answers your question in that. And you should never be on probiotics long-term every day for the rest of your life. That could cause problems on the long term. So any probiotic therapy should be pulsed. So you start it and then you give it yourself a break. And ideally also you have variety, because what we do know about the gut microbiome is that the only thing actually that we know about the gut microbiome is that variety is better than non-variety. Even with the good gut bacteria in the gut, you want variety, and you want them to be in the right place, which is primarily in the colon and not in the small intestine. So beyond that, we don't actually even know for sure what is the optimal profile of gut microbiome, because it depends on your genetics, your ancestry, where you live, and what food is available to you, and even the time of year. It changes seasonally. So as long as you're doing things to maintain the diversity of your gut microbiome, so a diversity of fermented foods, a diversity of probiotics. And let me tell you, some people, they'll add probiotics and fermented foods to their diet and they'll experience very bad reactions, like terrible reactions. If that happens, it's not about pushing through and continuing. It's about stopping and recognizing that the gut health has been seriously affected to the point where you're now reacting to these probiotics, right? And the gut health needs to be addressed and supported, usually with help guidance, right? Through a health promotion program or through a treatment protocol with a health professional that has been trained in the gut microbiome and in gut health, which, by the way, is not going to be your Western trained family doctor unless they have undergone additional training. So just like you wouldn't go to a general physiotherapist to get your pelvic floor treatment, it's not that they're not a good therapist, it's just that they haven't undergone that additional training. So we should not go to our family doctors unjustly expecting them to understand this. It's unfair and it's kind of unkind, because it's like asking them to reach beyond their training. So they may become interested in it if you bring it up, and they may do additional training, but usually we need to bring other health professionals onto our healthcare team to be able to address these issues. Just like a well-rounded business would have a marketing specialist, a finances, technology, digital, the same, your healthcare team should be equally well-rounded.
That's great. I love all this information. So much stuff I never knew. So let's talk about the next pillar.
Yeah, this one's a big one, the stress response, right? Because the interesting thing about stress, right, is that first of all, not all stress is bad. We do need some stress to, get us up in the morning from a sleeping state, to get excited about a work project or planning a trip or a holiday, getting ready for it. So some degree of stress is necessary, and we want balance in stress as well. There's physical stress, which is, things that originate in the tissues. And then there's mental, emotional, spiritual stress. So things that might come from the mind into the brain and affecting the body. And so the stress response, regardless of whether it was a physical stress or an emotional, spiritual stress, will engender the same response in the body, which is activating the nervous system to produce hormones in the body. And these hormones include the cortisol hormone, adrenaline hormone, and all of these hormones, again, in small amounts at the right time of day, is important. So you do need some cortisol hormone in the morning to get up and get going, right? And again, if you have like a work deadline or if you have a trip that you're planning, you need to have that. People who have had so much stress in their life over a long period of time eventually reach a burnout stage, which can just hit them like a ton of bricks. You don't even really realize you're heading towards there until you're on the other side. And I've hit burnout. I've had burnout. It's terrible because all of a sudden you go from being this very high achieving person to barely being able to lacking motivation to get out of bed. There's some psychological effects of burnout, like you start to lose interest, you start to emotionally detach from other people, and it's just kind of a really sad state to be in. And that can happen from work, from obligations with family, caregiving, all those sorts of things, financial, they all add up. And the end response is the same. It's that cortisol hormone response. And so what we want to do is we want to protect our stress response system from too much perceived stress. And that perceived stress is very important because from an emotional, mental, spiritual perspective, we cannot avoid stress. You can't avoid life. Right? Even if you go to a monastery, you're going to have stress in that monastery, like dealing with other nuns or monks and, that kind of thing. So you're going to have stress. So it's more about recognizing that we need to have tools in our toolbox to be able to change the way we see stress coming into our lives. And by changing that perception, we can then change the stress response. So for example, some people meditate. Why do they meditate? Well, one of the reasons to meditate is it gives you a little bit more of a buffer time between the stress stimulus and the stress response. So let's say your boss comes to you or your employer or your employee, and they say, we have this deadline, right? That's the stress stimulus. And if you are meditating, you are more likely to kind of take that information in and sort of sit with it and, give yourself the space to say, okay, I could see this as a negative thing, or I could see this as a positive thing. I'm going to choose to see this as a positive thing because, we are a successful business. So that's why we have deadlines, or this is an opportunity for me to talk to my team, to my employers or employees, so we can come up with a strategy together. Right. And then you kind of, are able to get yourself out of engendering a stress response. Because once that stress response is activated, once the nervous system is activated, you get that cortisol release. Now, you may be able to use other techniques, and this is important to calm down that stress response once it's activated. So for example, breath work, deep breathing exercises, by definition, calm down the stress response and will reduce the amount of those stress hormones that are released. So all of these strategies that they're now teaching our children in school, which our generation, unfortunately, we didn't have that education, so we have to make up for it, and we need to use it, right? So I use deep breathing all day. It's like I self-medicate with deep breathing because I love my work. I love doing this. After we do this recording, I'm going to do a bit of deep breathing because it stimulated my stress response in a good way. I'm I'm having to be here, energetic and present, but there's a price I pay for that. And I'm going to mitigate that with some really great deep breathing exercises afterwards. That's the mental, emotional, spiritual stress. Now, the physical stress is the stress on the body from the excess sugar, the ultra-processed foods, the food sensitivities. Those all stimulate our stress response on the physical level. And the body, again, in order to cope with that stress, has to create hormones like the cortisol hormone. And again, whether it was physical, spiritual, emotional, spiritual, that cortisol hormone is inflammatory. So you can give yourself inflammation-related conditions either through physical or through mental. And so diabetes is a perfect example. You can get diabetes through that hormone imbalance gut health route, or you can get diabetes through stress. That's been proven. Or all of the above together, which means you're going to hit diabetes harder, faster, sooner, right? Mm-hmm. So when we take into account the stress response, especially for women these days, when we are wearing our superwoman capes and we are doing all the things, and sometimes there are some signals of reaching burnout, right? It's like you're less, your resilience is less, your capacity is less, you're more irritable, your sleep is more affected. You start to notice problems with your menstruation if you're still menstruating. Maybe if you're already in menopause, your hot flashes are worse, your night sweats are worse. Like everything, again, the dial, that volume of the symptoms has been turned up in volume. So those are all signs of that stress response being too high, and you have to mitigate it. One way is to look at your life and do a canvas, like, can I eliminate ultra processed foods? Can I identify my food sensitivities? Can I reduce or cut out sugars? Can I eliminate toxic, stressful people in my life? Can I narrow down my volunteering activities to the things that bring me joy and energize me versus draining me? Can I talk to my boss or my employees and shift the scope of my work? So that does require, some big life strategic planning. But when it comes to the tools, in the moment tools, for me, it's meditation and breath work. You have to find what works for you. You have to find what you enjoy, what brings you a relaxation response. And what you want to do is engender a deep relaxation response at least a few times a day.
Absolutely. Yeah, interviewed in the summit, Dr. Chinayan. She is a cardiologist. And one of the most amazing tools in her toolbox is something called the Renegade Method. And it is like major stress reliever. It is amazing because, we need to, get a handle on all of the stress because, we're at the age of menopause. A lot of us are taking care of our children. We're taking care of our parents. We rarely have the time to just take a time out for ourselves and just breathe. And the deep breathing, of course, it stimulates the lymph. It, helps out with the parasympathetic. And I go outside and I go into the woods. That's how I get my oxytocin on. So.
I love nature. Nature is so they've studied forest bathing.
Yeah.
Spending time in nature is therapeutic.
Yeah, absolutely. Doctor, let's get into the last pillar.
Yeah, so the last pillar is toxins tolerance. And I find this one very interesting because it's the one that we least like to think about because then we have to, face what's happening in our environment. And it's very genetically influenced. So let's just give some facts. So as on a fact level, everybody has different genetics in terms of their capacity to absorb, transform, and eliminate toxins in our environment. And some of these toxins are natural toxins that are naturally found in our environment, like certain heavy metals in our soils, naturally found that we have to process and detoxify, certain bacteria, parasites, fungi, all those sorts of things. And some of those are now increasingly, they're not natural. They are the pesticides, they are the microplastics, they are the chemicals that have been shown to interfere with hormone functioning to the point where they have their own name in research, which is endocrine disrupting chemicals, which is, hormone disrupting chemicals, EDCs. And those are phthalates and BPAs. And so all of those are coming into our system. Now, fortunately, our body has methods of detoxification. The first is the gut microbiome, helps us detoxify those. The second is the liver. The liver is master detoxifying organ in the body. And genetically, some of us are hoarders and some of us are excretors. So some of us are genetically destined to kind of keep more toxins on board, which means that our tipping point for toxins exposure will be earlier and at a lower dose than other people who have amazing genetics for detoxification. And so you can see that playing out when some people are aging and they just look amazing and they're the ones who could drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes and they die over the age of 100 and everyone says, oh, my grandpa or my great grandma did this over the age of 100. Even though she was smoking or drinking, she probably had a phenomenal detoxification system genetically. Most of us don't. We kind of lie in the middle of that. And some of us are so poorly, such poor detoxifiers, even a minimal exposure will result in very poor health. And so we need to be aware that our toxins tolerance also changes with age and it changes as we enter menopause. So as an example, alcohol. So alcohol, as we age, our liver's capacity to change alcohol into a form that can be excreted. And before it's changed into a form that can be excreted, it's changed into a form that's actually quite toxic to the system. So we want that conversion of alcohol from the alcohol to the toxin to the excretion to be very efficient and fast. That slows down with age. And then it slows down even more when we start to have changes in estrogen because estrogen supports liver function. So as we decrease estrogen, naturally, our liver function changes. So the amount, quantity, and frequency of alcohol that we were able to tolerate when we were younger is not the same as what we are able to tolerate when we are older, even if we're on hormone replacement therapy because of the aging effect. So it sneaks up on us, and the thing is, many of us use alcohol to self-medicate our stress response, right? So we get home after a long day at work or taking care of others in our life, and we look forward to the relaxation response of the alcohol. The problem is that now you're paying for the relaxation response with poor whole body health, because little do you know that alcohol, while it helps you fall asleep, it actually wakes you up in the middle of the night around 2 o'clock in the morning if you're having it around dinner time, give or take a few hours, because of that conversion from the alcohol to the toxic product to then being excreted. But while it's in that toxic form, it's an upper. So alcohol is a downer, but then it's converted into an upper. So it interrupts your sleep. You may or may not wake up, but your quality of sleep will be affected. And the next day, your energy levels will be altered for the worse. And you may never even relate that to the drink that you had the day before until you pull alcohol out and you notice, look at this, I am sleeping like so much better. And I'm waking up feeling more energetic. I had no idea that this had to do with my alcohol intake. So that is an example. Another very strange example is toxic light. Toxic light. So for example, in Body Wisdom, in my health promotion program, I teach the women how to manage the toxic light in their environment, because again, we're not as affected when we're younger, but we still are. So children are still affected by this. And particularly as we age, we become our hormones, again, pillar number one, our hormone balance gets really affected by this fourth pillar, toxic light, because the toxic light will affect your melatonin hormone production, which is the hormone of deep sleep, and it affects your cortisol hormone. So it also affects the third pillar. So you can see how all the pillars are interrelated. Yes. So understanding toxins in your environment, everything from the light that you are or are not exposed to, the timing, the quality, right? And it's almost like a little crash course in interior decorating, where you learn what are the optimal lighting strategies for daytime and nighttime so that you can have good hormone balance, so you can have deep sleep. And in deep sleep is when we regenerate our tissues. We need more of that as we age, not less of it. So these are strategies that are all natural, right? Don't involve any hormone replacement therapy. Now, can HRT layered on top of the four pillars, strategies be helpful for some women? Absolutely, it can. But will you get your best response to HRT if you don't address these four pillars? No, you will not. And if you're not a candidate for HRT, as you mentioned before, these are just like the foundational work that you must do. But it really is for every person. Like, you just have to do this foundational work if what you want to experience is your best health.
Amazing. I love talking to you. You know so much, doctor. So unfortunately, we're running out of time. I do want to respect your time. So Dr. Mills, where can people find you?
Yeah, so because I recognize that everybody has their favorite social media, I'm kind of everywhere. So my favorite place is on YouTube, because that's where you're going to find all of my videos. If you want to look up my menopause playlist, my bone health playlist, perimenopause, hormone health, gut health, I have playlists for all of those with videos. I have a weekly Wild Wisdom show, and so it streams live on YouTube. I take sections of those videos out, like important, pieces of information, like highlighting these informations, and I drip them out on Instagram. So at dr.patriciamills, which is the same handle for YouTube, or you can search me on YouTube, Dr. Patricia Mills, MD. I have a Facebook group for women called Wild Wisdom for Women with Dr. Patricia Mills. I'm on LinkedIn. You can also find me on Rumble. It's everywhere. So, just looking for me all around, and just choose your favorite platform and just follow and learn the health wisdom. That's all I can say. It took me years to acquire this. Right. So, I'm in my mid 40s. I started this in my late 30s, and I'm learning new things every day. And the important thing is to stay curious, have an open mind, be skeptical, but not cynical. So skepticism is healthy. It's looking at the information. Does it make sense? Does it interact well with other pieces of research? Like that kind of thing. Does it hold up the test of time? Does it work for you? So that's why I call my program Body Wisdom. I teach you how to listen to your body, learn from your body while applying these evidence-based strategies. So, as a first step, find me on social media. As a second step, download the free ebook, How to Naturally Rebalance Your Hormones. I give way more strategies in there. It's free. Take advantage of that. And if you're interested in the third step, joining me in Body Wisdom, my website is www.drpatriciamills.com. And if you look there in the live program section, you'll find Body Wisdom. Get yourself on the wait list, because I have a limited amount of spots, and I offer those up first to the waitlisters before I open it up to the general public. So this is a very timely for those of you who are just done with not feeling your best, and you just want to get to that level where, you asked me, like you said, I do so many things. The reason I can do so many things is because I have abundant energy, because I've worked on my whole body health. I've optimized my 4 pillars. Like, I've got 2 kids that I'm raising, right? Full business. Like, I love to cook, all those things. And I don't have problems doing all of that because I've done the work, and I have been in a bad place. And so I know what it's like to transition out of that and through that and into the good place. And that's really what every woman deserves, and what I want for every woman.
Absolutely. Dr. Mills, you're a total rock star. Thank you so much.
Bye.